Good morning from the Pacific Coast and welcome to Engaged in Place, part of Imagining America's month-long collective creative engagement and the final session of week 3 of the series. My name is Mina Matlin and I serve as the Managing Director for Imagining America. Each week this month, we are engaging in a collective reimagining of the multiple systems, structures, and ways of being that shape our lives. This week, we have been focusing on the spaces, places, and ways in which we build community, with a weekly call to action that invites us to identify the skills we are responsible for building in our communities to create the liberatory spaces of our dreams. Today's presenters, members of the IA Initiative, the Collective of Publicly Engaged Designers, address this call within the context of engaged design. Before we get started, I have a few logistical items to cover regarding today's session. The session offers closed captioning, so to access the closed captioning, click on the CC button found at the bottom of your Zoom window. You will have opportunities throughout today's session to meet and interact with our presenters and each other, and we begin with inviting you to use the chat to introduce yourself. Finally, we invite you to engage with us on social media. Our event hashtag is #ReimaginingAmerica20. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our presenters today, Mallika, Bose, Brett Snyder, and Gabrielle Bendiner-Vianney. Mallika is an architect and urban planner with a specialization in environment behavior studies. She's a professor of landscape architecture, associate dean for research, creative activity, and graduate studies with the College of Arts and Architecture at Penn State. Mallika serves as co-chair of CoPED and is a member of IA's National Advisory Board. Brett Snyder is an architect and designer whose work focuses on the intersection of architecture and media. He is an associate professor of design at UC Davis, a partner of Chang and Snyder, and a co-chair of CoPED. Brett is also a member of IA's Regional Advisory Council. Welcome, Brett. Welcome, Mallika. And finally, Gabrielle Bendiner-Vianney is an urbanist, curator, and artist practicing new modes of public arts, design, and urban research for community engagement, and is author of Contested City, Art and Public History as Mediation at New York's Seward Park Urban Renewal Area. She is principal of the design and research studio Biscata and teaches urban studies and public art at the New School. So thank you, Brett, Mallika, and Gabrielle for being here. And I now turn this space over to you three.
Thank you so much, Mina, for the really nice introduction. And I'm really looking forward to this session. I'm gonna just start by sharing my screen. Well, hello, everyone. Again, I'm one of the co-chairs of CoPED, which is the Collective of Publicly Engaged Designers. And the session today is called Engaged in Place. And I'm just going to start off by giving a little background of what CoPED is all about. So CoPED is an initiative of Imagining America. It was started, I think, around 6 years ago by Sekou Cook when Imagining America was at Syracuse University. And Mallika and myself kind of adopted it a few years ago. And it has really been our mission with CoPED to think about how within Imagining America, we can offer a space specifically for designers who are doing work that is engaging with communities. And so, you know, while the space of Imagining America has a kind of larger focus, the idea really is that, you know, within the design community across architecture, landscape architecture, design, and planning, how can we start to create tools, resources, a space to engage with each other and build a kind of best practices that we can share with each other. So some of the initiatives that we've done in the past, just to show a couple, a few years ago, which you can see on public, this was actually done through a session at one of the Imagining America conferences. And the idea really was many of us know our kind of local regions and the resources and tools to help designers. Let's share those resources so that we can start to build and work collectively. Also, over the past couple years, we've been working on a series of case studies. Last year in Albuquerque in 2019, we invited people working in the community engaged design field to submit, and these became really the kind of basis for discussion. And this is something that we will show on the website in the coming months. But really, what I think this did is it facilitated a discussion around best practices in design. And I think this has been really great to see these kinds of projects kind of flourishing within our community. And then this year, you know, as the kind of twin pandemic hit, we felt that it was a moment that was really important to shift. And so while we had been focused on the case studies, I'm going to kind of shift things over to Mallika, and she's going to talk a little bit about the Engaged in Place project that we're focusing on today. Mallika.
Thank you, Brett. It's great to see all of you over here. And just as he mentioned that, so I want to talk a little bit about how we came upon this project. So one of the things, like most of you are probably, we were trying to engage in something which would be cognizant of the double or dual pandemic that we find ourselves grappling with, the pandemic of, you know, the coronavirus, the public health pandemic, as well as the issues brought to the fore with the George Floyd incident. And so we thought that we would like to engage in something that would give all the designers, publicly engaged designers, a chance to reflect upon what this moment means for designing in the public realm. And I know many of us have been grappling with that some of the issues that have been brought about by the pandemic, will that lead to a lessening of the public realm, because it's a place where people come together, are in close proximity to one another. So with that in mind, Brett and we brainstormed, and we thought that one of the ways that we could come together would to have a collective reflection, an opportunity for collective reflection on this. So the way we imagined it is we came up with these three buckets or themes of public engagement and design, and just posed a few questions really to begin the conversation, not in any way to be to encapsulate it in any way. So we put forward these questions to start the conversation, and were really grateful and gratified to get the number of thoughtful and varied perspectives on the themes of public engagement and design. So our thought, or the way we've decided to organize this session is kind of using these three buckets as a framework that we will get into 3 breakout rooms and engage in a little more in-depth conversation about each of these topics. And the one thing we wanted to think about is not only just understand what we are going through, but try to imagine and reimagine a future which is better than where the place we find ourselves, and think of some action-oriented thinking to get us to that better place, to the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So that's kind of the broad framework. Brett, did you want to add something to it before we start going into the...
Only just to say that when we do go into the breakout rooms, everyone will have, there's different ways of kind of seeing what the different responses have been to each of the different themes. So we have we have slides. So within each of the breakout sessions, we have kind of summary slides that show kind of key statements or key responses to each of the prompts. People can also be looking on their phones. So if folks want to just use the engaged in place hashtag in Instagram, they can look and see what the different responses are. And then also within each of our breakout rooms, we will share a link to a Google document that has all of the kind of text responses to each of the different themes. So I think that's it.
So, and also just for the logistics, Brett and Mina and Erin, help us out if I'm saying something wrong. We get to choose which breakout room we go to, right? Each one of us. So you'll have 3 breakout rooms, public engagement and design, and you can choose which breakout room you want to engage in, and then we will be dispersed.
And then just lastly, the hope is that one person in each breakout room might volunteer to report back at the end. And really, I'd say that the big question in terms of when we come back to have a group discussion again will be, what are, actionable items that we could start to think about in relationship to each of these themes. So I think, what are things that we missed that were not part of the discussion that should be part of the discussion, and what are things based on some of the responses that might be ways that we could move forward in relationship to each of these themes. So I think, Mallika,
Yes.
anything else?
No, I think looking at the time too, we are right on time. So maybe we can start moving into our breakout rooms and see all of you back in about 20-25 minutes.
And one of us will be in each of the 3 breakout rooms. So I will be in design, Gabrielle will be in public, and Mallika will be in engagement.
See you there.
Welcome back, everyone. It's great to see everyone. And I think everyone is just in the process. Maybe I'll give another few seconds for folks to come back from their breakout sessions. And just so everyone knows, I think, one, I want to make sure, I forgot at the beginning to ask Genevieve, if Genevieve can share in the chat, if folks would like to put their name on a mailing list for CoPED, there's a Google Sheet and you can see it right now in the chat. So if you would like to be involved in other kind of CoPED related initiatives, please put your name and fill out the information if you'd like to be involved. So the idea just in the last 20 minutes is that we're going to kind of report back from each of the breakout sessions. And please, I think there was one person in our breakout session, but if other people want to kind of chime in, please feel free to kind of add if something was left out. So I think we're going to go in the order that we started. So we'll start with public, which is Gabrielle.
So we didn't do, I didn't do a very good job of asking if somebody would report back. We jumped into it. So I'm wondering if one of you guys would volunteer, so you're not just hearing my voice. Maybe Elizabeth or Craig or any of you guys want to just jump in and just to say a little bit about what we were just talking about.
One thing we talked about was the need for public space that's not just allocated as public space, but also is not hostile towards specific demographics or socioeconomic classes or people who are maybe not potential customers towards surrounding businesses and stuff like that. Looking at the quotes, that was one of the things we touched upon.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Any of the rest of you guys want to jump in? Because there was also, one of the things I was hearing a lot was also kind of thinking about what public space is really used for, thinking about it as this really essential kind of thing, and yet not really being treated in that way. And that in some ways there's also this sort of push and pull of the isolation of people, but then also the ways through COVID, but also the ways in which sometimes now just to get outside, we're also sort of pushed into public spaces that might be very, not just unwelcoming, but actually almost violent. And that might be something that we're grappling with in this situation as well. So, and there were lots of other thoughts too.
Yeah, I think we were kicking, well, I was kicking around the notion of the private, the slow, but the slow privatization, and slow is probably not even the right term, inexorable privatization of public space. That I think just some of what Matthew was getting at is that, you know, we have turned a blind eye to how much of our public space seems public, but it really is private. You know, the public space in front of, you know, buildings isn't really public. It's just an extension of a private development. The ways in which, you know, we don't do this anymore, especially after COVID, but shopping malls that take huge public subsidies, put businesses out of business that are on streets, turn their malls into these sort of quasi quaint street motifs. But the moment you want to protest something, the moment you want to speak about something, you realize that it's not public. It's not public at all. It's private, and you can't do that here. But then where can I do it? You've destroyed the place where I would do it. So, you know, and I'm riffing on this because we really didn't talk about this specifically in our group, but I'm just giving examples of the slow privatization of public space, and COVID has heightened how much we actually need space to just be space. That it doesn't have to be commodified, or you don't have to spend money just to be in space.
If I could add to that, I really appreciated in our talk Craig's comment and reminder that, especially during this time when we find that things are getting new names. For example, we were talking about how parklets are now being, as discussed, co-opted by restaurants and become now privatized commodities, and they're getting new names. And that is a sign of gentrification. That is a sign of the socioeconomic accessibility by anybody and everybody that should be available in the public spaces is now no longer, because you have to pay to be in that space. And so while there may be trends to come up with new names for these POPs, as they're called, I guess, privately owned public spaces, which is such a funny, contradictory term, but that's what's happening. To just remember that, yeah, they just need to be spaces. Maybe they don't need a special name. We need public spaces to be public and available for everybody.
Yeah, they already have a name, public space. I mean,
there you go.
It's got a name.
That's right.
I think just one other piece that was a through line from everything that we talked about was the ways in which kind of the lack of access or the lack of publicness of many different things, both public space, but also we talked about a little bit about kind of public schools, the ways in which those are really kind of showing up all the cracks that we kind of already knew about, but that really deeply exist, of deep inequities that have been there over the long term. That, you know, questions about like remote school and thinking about the public nature and what's the responsibility of the public, whatever it is, in the sphere of equity. So I think maybe we should leave it at that, because I know there's a lot of other pieces, but thank you all.
I'll report on the engagement, Mallika.
Yes.
Great. But before I start, it's interesting about the POPS, because the Cody Park, where the Occupy movement was, that was a private space. And that's precisely why the police couldn't go in and evacuate them, right? So when the police is the public is the one who's attacking the citizen, the private sometimes works for you. So that is an interesting conundrum. But we discussed first in the context of the higher education institution, many of our institutions have programs that engage the public, citizens, the neighborhood, but because of COVID, a lot of funding is being pulled back. And it makes us question how committed are we when the event happens and the community needs our support the most. That's exactly when we start pulling back, because it costs too much. And that led to the conversation about, is it just a trendy language, the engagement that we start to use, and it's just an empty word like sustainability and community, perhaps. And many of the funding requires us to have public engagement component. And it's just a box that we have to check at some point, but how can we really come up with a method and commitment to make it a central aspect of a project. Also, in terms of commitment with the neighborhood, you can't just start engaging right away. There's a time involved in that. How long are you willing to stay? And are you gonna follow up? Are you gonna maintain? Are you willing to grow with the community? And there's also engagement among us within the studio, within the classrooms, within our school, how can we start engaging with each other differently so that on one hand, it becomes a practice to engage with the community, but also we just treat each other better, I guess. So those were the things that we discussed.
Thanks, Yutaka.
And I think we're on to design. And Johanna, did you want to at least start the report back for design?
Yeah, and definitely encourage anybody else who was in our group to add whatever, they see fit was important. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we tossed around. I mean, Catherine and Haley just talking and connecting, what happens in design studios when we're in our educational spaces, also having a lot to do with what's happening in the real world. And by the real world, just outside of the academic sphere, and how can academic spaces also be safe places to ask certain questions that we don't always get to ask when we're outside kind of living our day-to-day lives. Kathleen talking to, ways of really encouraging interdisciplinary conversation and how that is both challenging and so necessary, and how can design and the ways that we practice it encourage or also limit different kinds of collaboration and dialogue between disparate sectors. Letitia came with such, thoughtful and really important feedback about how when we design, oftentimes we're looking for solutions and emphasizing a one-size-fits-all approach because we want things to be simple and straightforward, and how that really doesn't work a lot of times for different reasons. Just kind of referencing what's going on in her neighborhood in Chicago with how both the city and also the school system are trying to, solve the issues that are happening with our current COVID crisis and other associated issues with really simple one-size-fits-all kind of access to internet, but not necessarily accounting for the ways that people don't always live in apartments or houses that are recognized by the city. And so they get missed over for different sorts of provisions or tools that are made available, or just the fact that everyone has really different experience with technological tools. And so when we're talking about education going more digital, what works for one family might be fine if parents can go and, help younger kids with their lesson plans, or older kids too, but it doesn't always work when people don't know how to use the tools that are available, and for teachers too. So I think really emphasizing the fact that we have complexity and these really big problems, and ways of using them shouldn't be about having just one size. How can we bring more diversity of experience and of needs into the design conversation, and really encourage our capacities for having creative thinking in order to own the ways that we can address them, to not pretend as if we have the answer, to really encourage the use of our imaginations and own that as a real asset and a resource, rather than something that's just a part of our process and the things that we deliver to clients, to projects, to people who are in need are simple and decisive. I think really owning the complexity and the role of our creative imaginations in harnessing that for better outcomes is something that we touched on, but so much that we also didn't get to because it was a really short conversation.
To that end, I just put Brett and my emails there because we knew that it would be just not even the tip of the iceberg. So if you want to continue the conversation, please drop us a line. We will, we would like to invite you all into the fold of CoPED, so to say. Brett, did you want to?
Actually, just one thing that Johanna, you did an amazing job of kind of summarizing the conversation. One thing that you said that I also kind of saw in some of the responses is just being kind of thoughtful around like where the designer comes into the process. And that was also in I think Jennifer Lung's response around like just thinking about, having a designer in the room that can help kind of facilitate and make a conversation, so that we're not coming up with what I think Kathleen had remarked around, which is like solutions that don't necessarily make sense, or the one that Letitia mentioned around this kind of mismatch of one size fits all when it actually doesn't fit. And it's that kind of creative thinking that can help, I think, sometimes facilitate the conversations and make the better match. So I really appreciated that from the conversation. there was one other thing I wanted to say that now I'm forgetting what it was. I think it was building on sharing the, I think Mallika just said around kind of sharing our emails so that folks, you know, that want to be part of the CoPED conversation. And I just remembered what that thing was, which is that all of the responses that folks, you know, the kind of initial responses, we just really appreciated those. And you know, I know there's several folks on the call today that kind of contributed, and I think just incredibly thoughtful responses. And you know, we kind of mentioned, I think in some of the emails that went out, that we do plan to do some kind of publication around this. It may be, you know, a small book or booklet or poster, but we would love to kind of, the idea is that from that, you know, from that kind of conversation and also the conversation that we had today, that we could produce something that we could potentially, even if it's just, you know, a few $100s or something, that we might raise money and be able to give it to some, you know, related cause. So that's the kind of hope, is that not only did the kind of contributions facilitate, I think, a really thoughtful conversation, but that we also can hopefully use these to support something. So we'll kind of share more as that develops over the coming months. So I don't know if there's any other, I think those are my last remarks. I don't know if there's anyone else that has any kind of last thoughts or closing remarks.
Yeah, just open it up. Anybody wants to just share some thoughts.
I would like to say thank you for making this forum available, because those are really, and the way that you divided it, those three themes are interlaced and interconnected, and they provide a little bit more, you know, quietness, so we can actually start to look at things, how one may impact them, because in tumultuous time, everything looks chaotic and one cannot know where to begin, right? And so this actually brings a little bit more clarity, and I really personally appreciate you inviting us to be part of this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda.
I would just say one other thing, and then just echoing Kathleen in the chat, thinking about the images themselves. I was really moved that you guys structured this as an Instagram thing, right? So grounded in images, and I know we haven't looked at the images all that much today, but I think it's really well worth looking back at just even the images and the kind of the fullness of those images, and seeing like both the images with their text attached, but also even thinking about, you know, kind of to Kathleen's point, the ways in which there's a kind of a call to action in doing all of this, and in the ways in which trying to find an image that sort of stands for a lot of complexity, I think is exciting, and exciting to see the breadth of that too. So thank you.
Yeah. On that note, I do also just want to thank, because I think there was certainly the inspiration, which was a similar series called Urbanism Beyond Corona. And if people don't know that one, they should also search that hashtag, which was colleagues from CCA that launched that effort. And I think what kind of led us to do this one was that was done kind of earlier in the pandemic, where it was really just thinking about the kind of COVID situation, and really the kind of twin pandemic over the last months was what prompted us to kind of do this. So we have been incredibly appreciative of all of the thoughtful responses. And actually, I also just want to thank Gabrielle. So appreciative to have you come in and kind of co-host this with us. And I also want to thank Genevieve, who's been incredibly helpful in terms of developing and creating some of the graphics that have gone along with this. So thank you both so much for those efforts.
A big thank you to all of you. I know how busy all of our days are. So to actually take some time off to participate in the Instagram series, and as well as come here and participate, it really does mean a lot. So thanks a lot.
And I know we're at the hour. I'm just popping back in to also thank you, Mallika, Brett, Gabrielle, and all of you today for participating in today's session. I do have a few quick announcements as we get ready to close. So this wraps up week 3, our community development planning week of our collective creative engagement. And next week begins week 4, where we reimagine education. We invite you to visit iagathering.org for upcoming programming. And most immediately on Monday, this includes at 9:30 a.m., Graduate Public Scholars at the Center, a conversation on culture change, which is a panel organized by graduate student scholars who are part of IA's Leading and Learning Initiative. And then Monday's plenary session, Radical Scholars Explore Just Transitions with Barbara Ransby. And this considers how scholar movement alliances are organizing to transform a world that, as we know, urgently needs to change. So we hope to see you on Monday. We hope to see you next week for our final week. And thank you all again for being here today.
Thanks again.
Thank
Be well
you.
and be safe.